Hello everybody, welcome to the PokéLab discussion. My name is Lucas and I am an animal educator living in South Carolina in the United States. Hope you guys are having a great day wherever you're listening to this. Today we are going to be talking about a topic I really love, Pokemon through conservation. So Pokemon in the past has talked about a lot of conservation issues, and I believe that there are ways we can go further in that with the games in the future. So today we're going to talk about what they've done in the past and what we could see in the future that could help learn about different issues most people haven't heard of. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for me, Pokemon is a company that got me into animal biology to begin with. I have my degree in animal biology. I have a podcast with friends talking about the science into Pokemon. It's called the Sprites of Life podcast. But you really got to know just how powerful Pokemon is, not just to me, but for everyone on Earth, to be honest. I mean, this company has made over $100 billion in revenue, more than any other single entity or franchise has, in part because they are so iconic and so global. I mean, another thing to realize is that, like many billion-dollar companies, they've donated millions to charity. Things that help with inclusivity, helping groups that are disenfranchised learn coding skills. This is really cool stuff. Now, is this out of the ordinary? Not really, but it's still really cool to note that they've helped out a lot of people with the money they've generated. Another thing to remember, and I think you all can agree, they're more than just a game or a show. This franchise has literally gotten American football players to name their different plays after them. This is a franchise that got people to go out, become real-world scientists, and then go name creatures they found, new species, after Pokemon. That's insane to think that no one in the 90s thought this was going to be that big, but here we are today, and that train ain't stopping. It's going to keep going. The new DLC coming out, new games predicted in the future. There is not really a chance that Pokemon is going to slow down anytime soon. So let's take a bit of a left turn from that and talk about some issues that no matter whether you play Pokemon like a pro or you just casually play it, these are issues that affect everybody. So let's talk about the big one, get it out of the way. Climate change affects everyone. Rising sea levels, increasingly more powerful storms, drier summers, wetter winters. This has caused a lot of issues globally. No matter where you're living, it's affecting you. Now, depending on where you live and your background and where you're exactly staying in your area, that effect could be a lot higher or lower. It could be completely different from mine. I live in an area that floods whenever it's high tide, but that might not be your case. It is important to realize that climate change is a global effect, but its effects are so broad that it's hard to focus on it and sometimes becomes too much for people to even think about. So we always need to find some way to kind of teach people at least the bits that they really need to understand. Now let's go ahead and talk about one that I really am passionate about, and that is going to be animals losing their homes. So animals, as we develop and continue to grow, these creatures lose where they've lived for sometimes millions of years. These organisms have survived on this planet longer than we have, and when we build our homes, they are either going to die off, they are going to find a new place out somewhere in the wild nearby, or they're going to move into our territories with different results. So we have to embrace that fact and know that when we are working to try and build our own world, we're kind of taking theirs down as well, and this can lead to quite a few problems. Now, the obvious one is always going to be pollution. If you say pollution, I don't care who you are, what side of whatever aisle you're talking on, it affects everybody. You got smog, you have runoff from rivers, not recycling, throwing garbage where you shouldn't, the list goes on. But there are other kinds of pollution people don't think about. There are types of pollution that people really don't consider because they can't be as seen or identified easily by people. Now, these are all major issues. These are all problems we have to try and address. But here's my thought. What if Pokemon could help us talk about conservation? Can Pokemon help us talk about conservation and saving our world? Well, they kind of already did, at least once or twice. Or yet a few times, honestly. My favorite examples come from Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon. So check this out. We have Yungoos and we have Alola and Rattata. Here are their Dex entries. And you will notice that their second sentences always leave something pretty cool. So Yungoos is not originally from Alola and was imported from another region. and Alolan Rattata caused a massive outbreak that has made them a public concern. This is based on a real-world issue happening on Hawaii to this day. Rats were leaving the ships that were visiting the island and caused an infestation that damaged the local ecosystem and the crops. Now, in order to stop them from eating the crops, people with a lot of power decided to import a ton of mongooses and let them loose. Problem is, mongooses stay up during the day, the rats are coming out at night. The two never met each other, and now instead of having one invasive species, you had two invasive species, causing problems on the island. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, you can only find Yungoos when it's sunny out. You can only find Rattata out at night. This is not even the only time they do this in Sun and Moon. They talk about conservation quite a bit more than you'd expect, and I love those Pokedex entries the most because of it. The story was in. I'm not the fan of the art style, but I really did love what they tried doing with that. It was a really strong take to take. Now, in the next generation, they didn't have as many, but they did have one of my favorites, and that is going to be what they did with Corsola. Coral reefs, very important part of the ecosystem. The mass majority of food we produce relies on the coral reef at some part of its life cycle. So they started to talk about, well, coral reefs, when they're healthy, look like a normal Johto Pokemon. But, eventually, if the waters are polluted, the algae that helps the coral survive leaves, bleaching the coral and either making it sick or wiping it out entirely, and you get that ghostly white skeleton look. And they talked about that. I remember streamers talking about that when they were playing the games and talking about how sad it was, and that brought awareness to a situation that might not have been recognized by someone who doesn't live by the ocean like I do. Now with Scarlet and Violet, there weren't that many, honestly. I mean, like the closest I could even, think about was our little Tinkaton friend here knocking Corviknights out of the sky, which I don't think is pollution. I think it's just kind of mean. So let's go over some of the Pokemon that we've seen in the past and how they can be used to address real-world issues you probably haven't heard of. So let's go ahead and see who's down the pipe first. Alright, so we got ourselves a Sandslash, another Pokemon from the first generation. So, the mouse Pokemon, not the most accurate, but whatever. Sandslash's body is covered by tough spikes, which are hardened sections of its hide. Once a year, the old spikes fall out to be replaced with new spikes that grow out from beneath the old ones. So, if you don't know what Sandslash is based on, they are based on the pangolin. Very cute creature found over in Asia and Africa. There are various different species. There are some that are smaller that climb trees. There are some that are larger that beat up termite mounds. What you might not have heard is that they are the most trafficked animal on Earth. That picture below is a picture of the scales that have been harvested from these animals. These animals are hunted and targeted more than sharks are in the ocean. They are targeted more than elephant tusks. They are targeted more than rhino horn. Anything you think of when it comes to animal being harvested for a body part, they're the ones who are getting the worst of it. And people believe that their scales can have medicinal value. In the scientific community, their scales are made out of keratin, the same thing as your fingernails and your hair. If you're not eating your toenails to feel better, then it's probably not going to make you feel better. But it is important to realize that Pokemon has had this guy for over 25 years, and they never once even touched on it. So I think the next time they bring this Pokemon into the game, they should add a little something extra. Check this out. I wrote this one. So in ancient times, it was thought that Sandslash scales could cure any disease. This led to them being wiped out almost everywhere except in a few different regions. So this doesn't take away from any of the work Pokemon has already done. This doesn't change any of the dexes, but it does bring light to a real-world issue that pangolins face. So when people play the game and read the dex, it gives you an idea of a real issue that needs to be addressed. Now, aside from Sandslash, there are plenty of Pokemon that represent animals that have been exploited. Sharpedo already had a really great entry in Pokemon Sun and Moon about how it used to be finned in ancient times, but recently they've gone back to the idea of it being the bully of the sea, which isn't really helpful. Now, Grafai is based on an eye, which is a kind of lemur, looks like this, and its terrifying middle finger has been given a bit of a mythological status because the people of Madagascar, some of them believe that if the middle finger points at you, it means you're going to die unless you kill it. So these animals have been targeted and hunted in real life as an omen of death, and that has led to their numbers being understandably reduced. All right, let's see what else is in the pipe. What else we got? You ever have one of those Pokemon that it's like, instead of like the final one overshadowing it, it's the first form that overshadows it? I know everyone loves Steel, but Walrus is a pretty great Pokemon on their own. So let's take a look. Ice Break Pokemon. Walrus swims all over in frigid sea waters while crushing icebergs with its grand imposing tusks. Thick layer of blubber makes enemy attacks bounce off it harmlessly. Perfectly fine. Really good description of a real-world walrus. Have any of you listening heard of Freya? Freya the walrus. So Freya is a really good example of a modern-day issue that picked up a bit of news. Freya was a walrus that started making their rounds around Northern Europe, popping in everywhere from the UK all over Scandinavia too. This walrus is not supposed to be there. This walrus is hundreds of miles away from its normal habitat, and that is in part because climate change has removed so much of their ice and so much of their home that this one had no choice but to migrate. Sadly, when Freya came in contact with people, started sitting on boats and sinking them, started breaking things, people tried giving Freya places to go and hang out otherwise, but eventually it got to the point where Freya had to be euthanized. So many people were feeding her, taking photos with her, getting her so used to people that she became a danger to herself and to everyone around her. And this is really sad. This animal did not have to pass this way, but human interaction and climate change forced her down this way. So let's add a little bit of something else for Walrus to help with that. Walrus prefers to live on the ice. Sightings of this Pokemon in warmer climates is becoming more common as more of their territory melts away. Again, doesn't take from anything, but it adds more impact to this animal's story. And there are plenty of animals that do get affected by climate change, and not always in the way you think. I'll be honest, ticks like Joltik love climate change. It means that they have more territory in order to move upwards and spread out. Problem is, as they move forward, so does the Lyme disease that they carry with them. And this can cause people and animals to get sick, especially animals who aren't used to the disease in their area. This can cause a catastrophe of issues. Carnivine is based on a Venus flytrap, and Venus flytraps have a very limited range. They are only found in North and South Carolina, naturally in the United States. It's not like some place randomly in a rainforest in Asia. It's one spot in the southern portion of the United States, and these animals no longer exist naturally in South Carolina because of climate change and people disturbing them and taking them out of their ecosystem. So it's another issue that people aren't exactly aware of. All right, last one to come down the pipes. Let's see what we got. All right, so with Zubat, it's not the Pokemon you think of when it comes to something like pollution, but hear me out. So it has no eyeballs, so it can't see. It checks its surroundings via ultrasonic waves it emits from its mouth. So you wouldn't think of this guy with pollution until you realize what noise pollution is. Noise pollution is an issue we've run into where the noise that we are creating through industry, living, traffic, you name it, has caused a lot of issues for animals. This is especially bad in the ocean where water carries more, but it does affect things like birds and bats who need to be able to hear what's going on to find a mate or find food. So with something with really high hearing, how are you supposed to find your food when all these extra noises you're not used to are already being blasted out at every number of the day, especially if you're living near an urban area? So let's try and change this up just a touch. It uses its hearing to see and find more Zubats. Then closer it gets to cities, the harder it gets for them to do either. Now, again, doesn't take anything away, but it lets us remember that cities and urban areas are hard for these animals to live in. And of course, there are tons of creatures that we need to be aware of with this sort of thing. Animals that live in the water, like dolphins and whales. When you have bears and you have this massive traffic and all this noise and pollution coming out, they're usually going to feed on it or start coming into urban areas. And birds, especially ducks or other migratory animals, are getting really blinded by either the light or the sound, making it very difficult for them to migrate. So it's very difficult for these animals to survive in these conditions. Now, all of that I've set aside, keep in mind that Pokemon is a business first. As much as we love it, as much as I love to use it to teach, their goal is to produce more money and make a profit. They are not focused on protecting the planet. They could be, but that's their choice that they are choosing another path. What can we do about it? We can't really start a boycott of being like, hey guys, go ahead and make the world more environmentally friendly. We won't buy your games. That's not going to work. There's a better way of trying to learn, at least on a personal level. So I'm going to give you all some homework. I know some of you just got on summer break, but you're getting homework. So step one of the homework, pick your favorite Pokemon. For me, it's Magikarp. That's a long story as to why, but let's just go with it. I love Magikarp. He is one of my favorite Pokemon to talk about. Now, after you pick your favorite Pokemon, I want you to learn where it comes from. For me, it's pretty easy. They come from Asiatic carp. There are multiple different species of carp. In this case, I focused a little more on the silver carp just because of how goofy it looks. Now, the third step might be a little tricky, but it is very much possible. I want you to go ahead and find out if that organism, if that culture, if whatever you're relating to with this Pokemon is doing okay. In my case, it's doing really well. Too well, in fact. These are an invasive species in the United States and have not only driven away a lot of the local fish that would normally survive there, they have also caused injury with people because when they hear noises, they jump out of the water in a panic, and there's so many of them, they jump into boats and hit people in the face. And that sounds funny until you realize how heavy these animals can get. And people, children, they get hurt. And that's not okay, especially since they were introduced here. It's not their fault, but they are a major issue that I wasn't really aware of. Now, the fourth step's pretty easy and can be a lot of fun. Share the experience. Use that experience share. I want you to go to your social medias, go to your friends, go to your families, and tell them, hey, this game I loved has blank. Blank comes from this, and I just learned that in real life, this is what's going on with that. Everything is connected to the real world right now, and it's really important to see that through and understand that all of these organisms have a place in our lives, that all of these things are connected to us. Pokemon does not exist in a vacuum. Everything it is put out is connected to our world. And I hope that we can use that to help fix the problems in our world, to help expand wider issues. Pokemon, whether they know it or not, has given us a franchise that is not only entertaining, but also connects real-world issues into their games, and thus connects other people with those issues that would not normally come in contact with. So think about it. Try and bring those ideas to your head, and hopefully you guys can go ahead and share those. Now, that does wrap up my time, and I do want to thank you all for coming. Now, if you do have any questions, I do have a Discord for our podcast, The Sprites of Life, and if you guys want to listen to me talk more about animals and science and all that stuff for other games, we're on Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're on any of the major platforms, and I hope you guys took something from this. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something new. My buddies, Chris and Don, they're there with me in the podcast, helping, supporting me to help you guys learn. So please have a wonderful rest of your time. I hope to hear from you all soon.